So, Liz, when you are dealing with our audience, as they're students, many of them are brand new grads. What are some things, what are some advice points that you like to give new grad MPs?
Absolutely. So I think the first place to start is like when you're thinking about like with your first job, it will happen. So just kind of give yourself a little break. It's okay. Some deep breaths. I mean, first thing is boards, right? And once you pass your boards and you're thinking about the jobs, once you get your first job, I think the main thing for me is that I recommend finding a job that is a good fit for you and trying not to take the first available. I mean, it can be tempting and there's different philosophies about that, but finding a supportive work environment that somebody will like not every, like the ideal situation is that everyone has a mentor, right? That they have somebody, I define as an ideal situation as somebody who is assigned to be your mentor. You meet with them once per week for 30 to 60 minutes to go over your questions, and they can be your point person that you talk to. That doesn't always happen, and you kind of sometimes have to ask for that yourself and just kind of advocate for yourself of like, listen, can we do that? And then I think the other thing is talking about a ramp up schedule that's appropriate, because I think it depends on the setting that you're working in. If it's with only physicians, if they've worked with nurse practitioners before, if there are a lot of nurse practitioners, like I think that's one of the traps that definitely that I see is that people will be like, okay, you're going to see 30 patients tomorrow. That doesn't happen commonly, but I think that it's not normal. And sometimes you do have to advocate for yourself, talking about as you're starting, like what the plan is. And I think most people, if they're hiring a newly graduate nurse practitioner, if they've worked with nurse practitioners before, they understand that.
Yeah.
But if they don't, then like having that conversation of like, okay, for like the first 3 weeks, you're going to see one patient per hour. And then, or a month. And then the next month you add one patient every single day or every single week or something like that. Just kind of figuring out what works for you and then just checking in. I mean, that's the main thing, is just making sure that it's like a kind of ongoing conversation. And I think like the third thing is that just resources, like knowing what your resources are. I personally am a huge fan of UpToDate, and I paid for it out of pocket. Like it's like $500 a year, but it was just, I was on it constantly and I still am. So whatever your resource is, even if you don't go for UpToDate, and I'm not sponsored by them or anything, I'm just obsessed with them. But I think those are the main things, is like a good working environment that's supportive and communicating your needs, and understanding that it's okay to, if you're overwhelmed, to ask for help, and to like make sure that it's a good fit for you.
Something else, you had mentioned something that made me think of something. When I was in school, we were having such a hard time finding preceptors. And this thing about paying for preceptors, that we didn't pay. But then I'm hearing that people are having to pay for preceptors. Now, one thing that I will say that my professor told us is that once you make it, turn around and reach back. Okay, someone had to precept you. So once you get to a place, and typically after your first year, look to precept someone. Okay. And it's a dual thing, because that goes towards your continuing education hours. It does. And they give you, it's not hour for hour, but you have to have so many, and they'll give you like a big chunk. Once you hit that threshold, I think it's like, I can't remember, but once you hit the threshold, they'll give you 25 hours of contact hours. And so like I precepted probably 2 or 3 students and got like well over like 200 hours with them.
That's awesome.
Because one had to get like 112 with me. But I think like the AAMP, and I don't know about the other board, but I know with AAMP, once you hit a threshold, they just give you the chunk of 25 hours.
Yeah.
And so it works in your favor. It really does work in your favor.
Does. And I feel like one of the things that new nurse practitioners, there's so much imposter syndrome, and that lasts for so long. Just this feeling of like feeling fraudulent and feeling like you're fooling everybody. And that they're going to find you out and they're going to take away your license. You're just feeling like, what am I doing here? And I think that lasts for a really long time, at least through, I don't know, everyone's different, but I think especially like hitting a year mark, I think there's definitely like a every day and week and month is better, but hitting a year has a big difference in terms of feeling more confident. And I think that people, when it comes to students, I'm definitely a huge proponent of having students, because again, like paying it back, right? But also like it helps you as a clinician most people feel like they're not ready. And like, what do I have to offer to a student? I only have a year of experience or whatever. I actually was kind of thrown into precepting a little bit sooner than I was ready for because of a staffing situation, that somebody leaving. But it was fine. And actually, when I was a student, I loved being with people who had less experience because it was like a snapshot of what the future is going to be like. And it also helped me feel less overwhelmed as a student because you kind of see how much looking up there is on the job and how much learning there is. And this is all normal versus when you work with somebody who's been in, like I worked with a PA who was a PA for like 10 or 12 years. And it was like really intimidating because I was like, I don't know all of this, but when I was with like your experienced student or a nurse practitioner, it was really helpful.
Okay, now we got a question here that said, I took boards in December and I'm having a hard time finding a job as everyone prefers experience. Could you offer some advice on that? And also Kevin said he's having the same problem. You want to take that first, Liz?
Yeah, I mean, I love everything nurse practitioner, but I definitely focus on the clinical stuff a little bit more than the job stuff. And our friend Amanda definitely is on that. But I and so something that she talks about that I found myself is that when being a nurse practitioner, the job postings are a little bit different than like nursing postings because like nursing postings, you can kind of like go on Indeed and there's an RN position at Mass General Hospital for this amount of money for this level of experience. And it's just very like cut and dry. And like for nurse practitioners, it's just very different because there's like this hidden job market is the way that she refers to it. And it's kind of like there are a lot of jobs available that are just not posted in that way. And so it kind of comes down to identifying where you want to work. And I'm a fan of cold calling in general. Like it's a terrifying skill, but I feel like just getting over that, it helps. But like reaching out to clinics, like I have a clinic that's close by in my home, in my work, the town that I live, and I reached out to them and they weren't hiring on paper. But if you talk to them and you talk about your experience and like, oh, well, you know what, we're thinking about hiring somebody soon. We're just getting the budget together. And that's how you kind of like work around that. And so like, it's intimidating to do that. And you might get a lot of hits in terms of like, you have to reach out to a lot of people. But if you can, customize your resume and customize your cover letter and understand the company that you're reaching out to and like, think of yourself as becoming part of their family. Because that's kind of what it is. Like you're going to spend all your time with them, right? I mean, if you're going to stay there for a long time. And so how are you a fit for that particular job and not just like spamming your resume? Like not to be disrespectful by saying that, but like, that's how I felt sometimes that's how I feel sometimes when I send out my resume. But it really, especially having hired somebody in my own business, like it makes a big difference when somebody actually pays attention to my company, what I do, because I care deeply about the people that I serve, right? And so if you think about a clinic, like they dedicate their lives to this clinic, especially the people that run it, right? And so like for you to walk in and be and say like, oh, I understand your company, like I see what you're doing here, like that kind of thing, I think is really impactful. It makes a big difference, especially if you don't have experience.
And then also, as a new grad, I definitely got a lot of no's, but I also got a lot of yeses. And I also got a lot of delayed yeses because I interviewed with a hospital system and they had multiple clinics. And there were certain clinics that needed a provider right then, but there were some that needed a little later. And depending upon the physicians and the providers there and how high paced, fast paced they were, some of them needed somebody who was able to hit the ground running. But then some of them were a little slower where they're like, okay, well, we have time to train a new grad nurse practitioner. And so I don't remember interviewing with the HR woman, and because she liked my personality, she kept me on her short list when anything popped up that she felt like I would be a good fit for. By the time she called me, I had already accepted another job. But just putting yourself out there, like Liz said, you people never forget you. And then you also want to make sure that you're sending like your follow-up thank you notes and you're sitting yourself out like that. And then also thinking outside of the box. There are so many areas I think sometimes we can get so caught in like, I'm going to be a clinical nurse when you can also work for insurance companies. A lot of insurance companies, they have clinics now. Okay. And so they are staffing it with physicians and they're staffing it with nurse practitioners. That's what WellMed is. That's owned by United Healthcare. That's the company I work for. And that's a clinic. It's a clinic. And so and they're owned by Optum, you know what I'm saying? And so going and looking at different outlets like that